Let's step into this first key point, the hidden pressure of perfection, because it's something that so many of us understand, yet so few are willing to admit. When you see someone like Matthew Hussey on stage, or in a video that goes viral, he radiates confidence. He seems unshakable, like he's cracked the code on relationships and life itself. But what we don't often pause to consider is the cost of holding that image, the invisible pressure of being the one with the answers. Imagine waking up every day and knowing that millions of people expect you to be the person who can untangle their heartbreak, restore their confidence, and give them the clarity they can't find anywhere else. Now imagine that on some mornings you wake up just as uncertain, just as tired, and just as confused about your own life as the very people who are looking to you for direction. That's the paradox Matthew has lived with, the reality that expertise doesn't cancel out humanity. And when your role in the world is to project certainty, those human moments of doubt can feel like failures you're not allowed to have. Perfection becomes an unspoken contract. If he admits he doesn't have it all figured out, will people still trust him? If he shares that he struggles too, will they see him as weak? This pressure is not unique to him. It's the same story that so many of us play out in our own lives. The parent who feels they must always be strong for their children. The leader who believes they can't afford to make mistakes in front of their team. The friend who thinks they have to be the one holding everyone together. The burden isn't just in the responsibility, it's in the silence of never being able to say, "I'm struggling too." Psychologically, this takes a toll because it creates a split identity. Publicly, you're the one with composure, clarity, and solutions. Privately, you wrestle with... Let's move into the second sorrow, the loneliness behind the spotlight. This is the one people rarely consider when they see someone who appears to be constantly surrounded by adoration, attention, and admiration. Because on the surface, how could someone like Matthew Hussey ever feel lonely? He's speaking to packed theaters, watched by millions online, celebrated as an authority in his field. But that's exactly where the paradox of loneliness reveals itself. You can be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly unseen. When you become a figure that others look up to, the dynamic of your relationships often shifts. Instead of being met as an equal, you're viewed through the lens of your role. For Matthew, people don't just see him, they see Matthew Hussey, the relationship expert, which means that every interaction, every conversation, every moment of connection is subtly colored by expectation. People come to him for answers, for comfort, for guidance. And while that's a gift, it's also isolating, because who does the guide go to when he needs guidance? That's the part people don't see. The irony of being a trusted advisor is that it can strip you of spaces where you can show up vulnerable, raw, and messy. Friends may hesitate to offer advice, assuming you've already thought it through. Strangers may project an image onto you that leaves little room for imperfection. Slowly, the circle of people who truly see the person behind the public persona becomes smaller and smaller. Psychologically, this loneliness cuts deep because connection is not about proximity. It's about authenticity. You can be in a crowded room, even on a stage filled with applause, and still feel completely disconnected if no one is relating to you as a person rather than a role. That is the sorrow that many high achievers and public figures share silently. They are seen by everyone, but true, are known by very few. Philosophically, it forces us to ask a hard question about human relationships. Do we connect with people, or do we connect with the image we create of them? And if we only ever meet the image, what happens to the human being inside of it? This isn't just about Matthew, it's about all of us. We live in a world that encourages people to brand themselves, to build curated identities, to become someone in the eyes of others. But the higher you climb in that performance, the more fragile and elusive genuine connection becomes. Matthew's unspoken loneliness teaches us something profound. Applause is not intimacy, and recognition is not the same as love. If anything, it should make us rethink the way we approach our own connections. Are we truly present with the people in our lives, or are we relating to the role we've assigned them? The parent who must always be nurturing, the friend who must always be strong, the partner who must always be dependable. Because if we can't see past the role, we'll never truly know the person. And maybe that's the call to action here, to notice the people in our lives, not just for what they provide, but for who they are. To create spaces where even the strongest among us can be vulnerable, and even the most admired can be honest about their struggles. Because if someone who appears to have it all can feel unseen, then surely those around us may be carrying the same hidden sorrow. Closing statement. At the end of the day, the greatest gift you can give someone is not your admiration, but your presence. Because being truly seen is far rarer than being widely celebrated. And it's the only thing that can dissolve the loneliness that hides in even the brightest spotlight. Now let's talk about another hidden sorrow, the pressure of perfection. For someone like Matthew Hussey, whose entire career rests on guiding others toward healthy relationships, the expectation to have everything figured out is constant and unrelenting. People project onto him an image of flawless wisdom, a man who never struggles, never doubts, never stumbles. And while it may look like a compliment, that expectation is a heavy weight to carry because it leaves little room for humanity. Think about what perfection really demands. It asks you to suppress your mistakes, your fears, your insecurities. It asks you to smile when you're exhausted, to answer when you're empty, to lead when you'd rather collapse. Over time, that pressure doesn't just exhaust you, it alienates you from yourself. Because you begin to perform even in your private moments, rehearsing the role you believe the world needs you to play instead of simply being who you are. The tragedy of this unspoken burden is that it creates a deep disconnect. Inside, you may feel broken or uncertain, but outside you must maintain the illusion of strength and certainty. And when you live in that gap for too long, you begin to question whether anyone truly knows you or whether they only know the mask you've learned to wear. Matthew, like so many others in positions of influence, must have wrestled with this. Not because he lacked authenticity, but because the demand for consistency from the world leaves so little space for authenticity to breathe. From a psychological standpoint, the pursuit of perfection is corrosive. It chips away at resilience because it denies the natural cycles of failure and growth that make us stronger. It magnifies self-criticism because every stumble feels like a betrayal of the image you've built. And worst of all, it fosters shame because when people believe you are perfect, you're imperfect. Another unspoken sorrow in Matthew Hussey's journey is the quiet loneliness that often comes with being the one everyone turns to for answers. When you dedicate your life to helping people with the most intimate parts of theirs, their love, their heartbreak, their search for belonging, you inevitably become a safe place for others to lean on. And while that is a privilege, it is also isolating. Because when you're constantly listening, supporting, guiding, and uplifting, it leaves very little room for you to be the one who admits, I don't know what to do either. Loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. It often comes from being surrounded by people who know only a version of you. In Matthew's case, millions know his wisdom, his strategies, his confidence, but how many truly know his fears, his doubts, or the nights where the very advice he gives feels distant to him? That is the paradox of leadership in any form. The higher you rise, the fewer people you feel you can turn to because you fear letting them see the cracks in your armor. Psychologically, this burden creates a cycle. When you feel like the strong one, the one people expect to have it together, you start to censor your own need for help. You swallow your pain, you bury your questions, you smile when you want to cry. And slowly, the gap between who you are and who the world thinks you are widens. That gap can be suffocating because even when surrounded by love and admiration, you can feel profoundly unseen. Philosophically, there's something almost tragic about this dynamic. Human connection is built on mutual exchange, on being able to give and receive, to share and be shared with. But when one side is always giving, the balance tips into loneliness. And it raises a question we all need to wrestle with. What does it mean to truly support the people who support us? Because even the strongest Jew, Ides need guidance. Even the wisest teachers need a safe place to fall apart. What makes this sorrow so hidden is that from the outside, it doesn't look like loneliness. It looks like success. It looks like influence. It looks like being surrounded by people who admire you. But the human heart doesn't crave admiration. It craves intimacy. It craves the kind of closeness where you can be unpolished, uncertain, undone, and still be loved. And that's often the one thing people in the spotlight are quietly missing. But here's where the insight comes in. This isn't just Matthew's story, it's ours. Many of us know what it's like to be the strong friend, the reliable partner, the dependable parent, the one who holds everything together. And in doing so, we forget to create space where we can be held too. The lesson hidden in this sorrow is not just about Matthew's life, but about the universal truth that strength without vulnerability is a prison. One of the most profound yet often overlooked sorrows in Matthew Hussey's journey lies in the sheer weight of expectation. When the world crowns you as an expert in love and relationships, people unconsciously strip you of the right to falter in your own. Every word you say is scrutinized, every move analyzed, every silence interpreted, and beneath that constant spotlight, there is little room for imperfection. Imagine living in a space where the very thing you teach, the messiness of human connection, is the one thing you're expected to navigate flawlessly, as if expertise makes you immune to pain. But here's the truth. Knowledge doesn't erase vulnerability. Understanding the patterns of human behavior doesn't mean you never feel the sting of rejection or the ache of loneliness. Even the wisest among us are still human. And that humanity means we trip, we question, we break down just like everyone else. The sorrow for Matthew and for anyone who has been put on a pedestal is realizing that people rarely grant you that grace. They want you to be relatable, but not too flawed, wise, but not struggling, accessible, but somehow above it all. Psychologically, this expectation can be crushing. It fosters a split identity, the public self, polished and certain, and the private self, fragile and uncertain. Over time, this split can leave a person disconnected from themselves, constantly playing a role rather than living authentically. It's like walking around in armor that looks impressive but feels unbearably heavy. The irony is that the very teachings Matthew offers, authenticity, vulnerability, emotional courage, are the very things he risks being denied by the image projected onto him. Philosophically, it makes us wrestle with an uncomfortable truth about how we treat those who lead us. We forget their humanity in our desire for their guidance. We prefer the illusion of their certainty because it calms our own chaos. But illusions, no matter how comforting, are ultimately prisons for them and for us. Because when we demand perfection from those we follow, we cut ourselves off from the deeper wisdom that comes from their struggles, their failures, their raw humanity. This sorrow extends beyond Matthew's experience. It echoes in the lives of anyone who has been labeled the strong one. The friend who always has the advice, the parent who always holds it together, the colleague who always delivers. We don't see the toll it takes to constantly meet expectations without ever being allowed to fall short. And in that invisibility, a silent suffering grows. The lesson here is profound. To free others from the weight of expectation, we must shift how we view strength. True strength isn't about living without cracks. It's about having the courage to live honestly with them. It's not about being the flawless guide. It's about being the kind of guide who says, I don't always get it right either, but here's what I've learned along the way. That kind of honesty doesn't diminish wisdom. It deepens it. There's another sorrow Matthew Hussey likely carries, one that is quieter, but perhaps even heavier than the rest. The sorrow of giving so much of himself to the world while wondering how much of him the world truly sees. Think about it. His career is built on guiding others through the chaos of love. Yet when your life becomes about solving everyone else's heartbreak, who holds space for yours? It's a paradox that sits at the core of so many people in service-driven roles. You become the voice others rely on, the hand they reach for, but in the process, your own needs risk fading into the background. This is not a weakness, it's an inevitable tension. Human beings are wired for reciprocity. We need to feel not only that we're giving, but also that we're receiving. Yet when the scales tip too far toward giving, an emptiness grows in the space that reciprocity should occupy. That emptiness, left unattended, is one of the most corrosive forms of sorrow. It isn't dramatic or loud, it's quiet, persistent, like water wearing down stone. And because it doesn't show on the surface, people often mistake it for strength. They see someone still showing up, still speaking, still smiling, and assume everything is fine. Psychologically, this creates what experts sometimes call compassion fatigue. But it goes deeper than that. It's not just fatigue, it's an identity struggle. You start to wonder, am I valued for who I am or only for what I give? Do people love me for Matthew, the man, or for Matthew, the guide? That tension is exhausting because it chips away at the very sense of belonging that all of us crave. Belonging doesn't come from being needed, it comes from being seen. Philosophically, this sorrow forces us to confront the question, what does it mean to live authentically when your life is entangled with the expectations of others? Authenticity, in its truest form, is a freedom to show up without performing. Yet when you are known for being the strong one or the wise one, how do you lay down that role without disappointing the people who look to you for stability? It is the paradox of leadership. People want your guidance, but what they need even more is your humanity. And here's the part we often miss. When a leader like Matthew allows himself to be vulnerable, to admit he too carries unspoken sorrows, it doesn't diminish his authority, it amplifies it. It tells the world that wisdom isn't born from having it all figured out, but from learning, breaking, healing, and choosing to keep going. Vulnerability doesn't erode trust, it deepens it because it reflects the very struggles we all carry but rarely voice. So the sorrow Matthew never revealed may not just be about heartbreak or personal struggles. It may be about the invisible weight of always being the strong one, the giver, the fixer, without enough room to simply be. And if we really listen, his life reminds us of something profound. The people who seem to have it all together are often the ones silently aching for permission to let it fall apart. Closing statement. The question we must ask ourselves is this: when we admire someone for their strength, do we also give them space to be fragile? Because until we do, we'll continue to admire masks instead of honoring souls. And perhaps the most powerful act of love for ourselves and for others is to stop demanding perfection and start embracing the humanity beneath